Number 5 on this list smelled so strong, so unmistakable, that if you caught it now, 50 years later, on a warm afternoon, you would be 7 years old again before you could stop yourself. And number 1 was pushed up and down a small British lawn every Sunday of every summer by a man in his shirt sleeves who would not have dreamed of letting anyone else do it. 7 things. That is what was in the garden shed of nearly every British home in 1965, a wooden building about 6 feet by 8 at the bottom of the garden, with a felt roof and a single dusty window and a door that swelled in the wet and had to be shouldered open. It was not really a shed. It was your father's room, the one place in the whole world that was entirely his, and being allowed inside it was a privilege. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next video, because we're only just getting started on the Britain worth remembering. Number 1, the push mower. In the corner of the shed, its handles resting against the wall, stood the cylinder mower, and in a great many British sheds, it carried the name Qualcast on the side. The firm went all the way back to 1801, and it made its mowers in Derby, and the Panther, first sold in the 1930s, sold in its millions to families with a small lawn and a Sunday to fill. What everyone remembers is the sound of it, that lovely mechanical whirring click as the blades of the cylinder turned against the bottom blade and the cut grass flew up into the box on the front, a sound that traveled over the fences of every street in England on a summer evening, and the smell of the cut grass, and the perfect stripes left behind by the roller, and a father standing back at the end to look at the lawn with a satisfaction he would never have put into words. It took real effort. You pushed it, and your own 2 arms did the work, and a boy allowed to have a go, for the first time discovered exactly how heavy a lawn could be. Qualcast bought up its rivals, took over the makers of the Suffolk Punch, took over Atco in that very year of 1965, and then the great Derby works closed in 1991, and the mowers went elsewhere. The next thing in the shed was older than the shed, older than the house, and made in a city built on steel. Number 2, the spade and the fork. They stood in the corner with the rake and the hoe, and they were made of Sheffield steel, and very often the name stamped into the shoulder of the blade was Spear and Jackson. That firm began in 1760, when a draper decided there was a better living in steel than in cloth, and in 1814 a young man named Sam Jackson was taken on as an apprentice, and his first job was carrying blades from the forge to the grinding wheels. By 1830, his name was over the door. What every man remembers is the weight of a proper spade in the hand, the wooden shaft, worn smooth and dark by years of use, the D-shaped handle, the blade polished bright as a mirror on the digging face by nothing but earth and work. You did not buy a new spade. You had your father's spade, and he had had his father's, and when the handle finally broke, you fitted a new one rather than throw the whole thing away. A tool like that was not a purchase, it was an inheritance. Sheffield's steel trade has shrunk away, and most of the tools now sold under those old and honorable names are made on the other side of the world. The next thing on the shelf was not bought at all. Number 3, the jam jars. Along the shelf above the bench, in a row, stood the jam jars, and every one of them was full. Screws in one, nails in another, washers and nuts and bolts and picture hooks, and a jar of assorted things that no longer belonged to anything at all. Sometimes the lids were nailed to the underside of the shelf so that the jars could be screwed up into them, hanging in a row, and every man who did that thought he had invented it himself. What everyone remembers is that nothing whatsoever, was ever thrown away. If a screw came out of something, it went in the jar. If a bolt was left over, it went in the jar. And the point of it all, the whole quiet philosophy of that shelf, was that one day, perhaps in 15 years, you would need exactly that screw, and you would go to the jar, and it would be there. A shed in 1965, was a museum of small metal objects awaiting their moment. Your father knew which jar. He did not have to look. The next thing on this list has a smell you would know instantly. Number 4. The tin of creosote. On the floor, under the bench, the tin, and beside it, the brush gone stiff as a board. And once a year, on a dry weekend in late summer, it came out and the shed and the fence got their coat. What everyone remembers is that smell, thick and tarry and sharp, catching in the back of your throat, a smell that meant heat and late summer, and your father, in his oldest shirt, with his sleeves rolled to the elbow. It went on brown, and it dried darker, and it soaked into the wood, and it kept the weather out of a wooden shed for another year. And the smell hung about the garden for days afterwards, and it got on your hands, and it did not come off. That particular creosote, the real coal tar stuff, was eventually restricted for ordinary garden use on health grounds, and the tins were taken off the shelves. The fences are treated with something else now, and it does the job perfectly well, and it does not smell of anything much at all. Before we go on, I want to ask you something. One of these things is not really a thing in your memory. It is a man, in his shirt sleeves, with his back to you, absorbed in something small. Tell me in the comments which one just brought him back. I read every single one. The next thing in the shed held next year inside it. Number 5. The seed trays and the seed packets. Stacked under the bench, the wooden seed trays, and on the shelf, held together with an elastic band, the packets of seed, and in a shed in 1965, there was a whole spring waiting in that small bundle of paper. What everyone remembers is the pictures on the packets, the impossibly perfect lettuces, and the towering sweet peas, and the runner beans that seemed to promise a summer of plenty. Your father sowed them in March, in the trays on the shed windowsill. In soil he mixed himself, and covered them with a sheet of glass, and every day he looked. And a great many British gardens in the 60s were not decorative at all. They fed the family. There were rows of potatoes and beans and cabbages, because a man who had lived through the war and the rationing that followed it did not entirely trust the shops, and a garden that grew food was a garden doing its proper job. The next thing was small, and it was the most used object in the whole shed. Number 6. The oil can. On the bench, the little oil can with its long, thin spout and the base you pressed with your thumb to send out a single bright drop, and beside it, the tin of penetrating oil, the one that freed a seized nut, and the rag, always the rag, hanging over the edge of the bench, black with use. What everyone remembers is that things were oiled, and things were sharpened, and things were mended. When the mower ran stiff, you oiled it. When the hinge squeaked, you oiled it. When the blade went blunt, you took it to the stone, and you sharpened it, and you tested the edge with your thumb. Nothing was replaced while it could still be repaired, and almost everything could still be repaired, because it had been made by someone who expected it to be. That is the whole difference between that shed and a shed today, and it fits in a little tin can. The last thing in the shed was there for no useful reason at all. Number 7. The deck chairs and the old wireless. Folded flat against the back wall, behind everything else, the deck chairs, with their faded striped canvas and their wooden frames that folded in a way nobody could ever remember, and every summer there was a fight with them on the lawn before anyone actually sat down. And on the shelf, on a nail, an old transistor radio, retired from the house but perfectly good, and it lived out there and it played the cricket. What everyone remembers is a Saturday afternoon in the summer, the shed door propped open, the deck chair on the grass, the cricket commentary drifting out through the doorway, and a man doing something quietly at the bench with the radio on. Not working, exactly. Not resting either, just being, in the one small wooden building in the world that belonged to him. 7 things. The push mower with its whirring blades, the Sheffield spade worn bright, the jam jars in their row, the tin of creosote, the seed packets holding next spring, the little oil can, the deck chairs and the wireless playing the cricket. None of them were valuable. They were simply there, the background of a life being lived at the bottom of a garden. We don't just remember the objects. We remember the man among them. What do you remember in your father's shed? The smell? The radio? Which jar? Tell me in the comments. One thing, one memory. Subscribe, because there is a great deal more of this country left to remember.